Into a first set of questions with all of our colleagues, and then we look forward to opening it up for engaged discussion on one of the most important issues facing diplomacy today, which is how are we going to ensure that there's peace in the future. If I may start with introductions, General Odongo Jeje is the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Uganda. His Excellency has served as his country's Minister of Internal Affairs, Minister of State for Defense, Minister of State for the Environment, and as the Army Commander. Welcome, General. It is a pleasure to have you here. Secretary Marko Stusing is the State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Slovenia. Secretary Stusing is a career diplomat. He has served in Berlin, he's covered Latvia, and he's also served in The Hague. The Secretary was appointed rapporteur by the members of the Assembly of State Parties to the International Criminal Court. The members of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons also appointed the Secretary to the Confidentiality Commission. Welcome. Dr. Joanna Ronek is the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon. Dr. Ronek has served as Poland's permanent representative to the United Nations and as Under-Secretary of State in Poland for Arab and African countries. She was also the head of the EU delegation in Jordan, and she has served as Poland's ambassador to Morocco, Egypt, Mauritania, and Sudan. Welcome. Dr. Robert Floyd is the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Organization. Dr. Floyd has served as the Director General of Australia's Safeguards and Non-Proliferation Office. He has chaired the advisory group to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency on safeguards. He has co-chaired a working group of the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification, and he chaired the Asia-Pacific Safeguards Network. Dr. Floyd has held a number of senior executive positions. He's provided advice to Australia's Prime Minister on counterterrorism, counterproliferation, and emergency management. Welcome. I'm delighted that also joining our panel is Ceyhan Sultanoglu. Ceyhan has worked for the United Nations for more than 40 years. She is currently the Assistant Secretary General representing the UN at the Geneva International Commission, which is a very unique diplomatic body that is looking at the aftermath of the crisis in Georgia in 2008. Ceyhan and I are also very old friends. Ceyhan, I'm delighted that you're here with us today. The purpose of this panel, as I said, is to talk about a very remarkable set of proposals that were made by the UN Secretary General in July 2023. These sets of proposals aim to reinvigorate and, if implemented, to transform the international system for peace and security. It is an impressive and, in many ways, remarkable document. The policy brief is actually organized into 3 sections. The first section presents a very compelling analysis of the threats we are currently facing to global peace and security. The second section of the Agenda for Peace presents a set of principles for what would be an effective collective security system. And then the third section, the heart of the document, presents 12 priority actions for what the Secretary General calls a robust collective security system. Our aim in this panel is not to discuss each aspect of the policy document, but to ensure that we do have a shared appreciation of the new agenda, which all the members of the United Nations are considering. Allow me to very briefly present just the 12 core recommendations so you can see the depth and the scope of the new Agenda for Peace. The very first recommendation, startling in its simplicity, is to eliminate nuclear weapons. I currently work in Washington, D.C., where I'm the head of a national institution called the U.S. Institute for Peace, and I can tell you that a lot of coffee cups dropped when we saw that first recommendation. The second recommendation is to boost preventative diplomacy in an era of global division. The third recommendation is to shift the prevention and sustaining peace paradigms within countries. The fourth is to accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to address the underlying drivers of violence and insecurity. The fifth recommendation is to transform gender power dynamics in peace and security. The sixth is to address the interlinkages between climate, peace, and security. The seventh is to reduce the human cost of weapons. The eighth recommendation is to strengthen peace operations and partnerships. The ninth is to address peace enforcement. The 10th is to support the African Union and sub-regional peace operations. The 11th is to prevent the weaponization of emerging domains and to promote responsible innovation. And the final recommendation is altogether to build a stronger collective security machinery. In the next hour, we'll be exploring this agenda and what it will take to implement it. With everyone's permission, I am going to start with His Excellency, Minister Jeje. And what I would like to ask you, actually, we've discussed all of this beforehand. So what the General and I agreed we would discuss is how Africa sees the new agenda for peace and what its hopes and expectations are for its adoption and implementation.
First of all, thank you very much, Liz, for this opportunity to interact with all these colleagues and my fellow panelists on this very interesting subject that I believe captures our attention and indeed touches our hearts all the time. Indeed, as you have correctly pointed out, the Secretary General in July did release his thinking for what we ought to do in order to ensure there is peace around the world. From the African perspective, we do know and we do believe the cardinal principle, the cardinal responsibility for maintenance of peace and security on the globe is the duty and responsibility of the United Nations. But as you all know, the United Nations, as we speak, particularly the Security Council, has had challenges in decision making, partly because of the rivalries, but secondly, in our view, because there are historical injustices that we need to address. For example, in the Security Council, in the permanent section, 240 million people in Europe are represented by 2 members. Africa, 1.4 billion people are represented by none. That in itself is a skewed manner of decision making. Secondly, we know that security challenges continue to evolve. The nature of conflict, the weaponization of technologies, and things of that nature are creating new challenges. From our own experiences on the African continent, we believe that conflicts of this nature can be addressed through a 3-tier method. First and foremost, grant the national authorities the opportunity to deal with the problem, give the regional and sub-regional organizations the opportunity, and thirdly, bring in the international system to address the challenges. We have experiences in this, and we believe if we apply this, we can certainly be able to address the situation. There is no doubt that conflict, or indeed war, can only extend the suffering. This ultimate solution is dialogue in finding out and addressing the cause of the conflict in the first place. We, on the African continent, have had examples of this nature, and we believe we can share our experiences with the rest of the world. The non-aligned movement is strong on the position of using dialogue, discussion in order to address the challenges of peace, security in the world. And we believe NAM has still a role to play.
Excellency. Excellency, thank you. Mr. State Secretary, Slovenia is currently on the Security Council. We would be interested in your reflections on the point that His Excellency just raised about the role of the Security Council, who sits on it, and whether or not it is still able to execute its functions as originally envisioned in the Charter. We're also very interested, given your impressive background at The Hague, your role in the International Criminal Court, on how you see the rule of law and the prominent place that the role that it plays in the new agenda for peace.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. And I have to say that I and my delegation, we spent 2 very productive days here. And exactly that kind of forums, I think, contribute a lot to the process of peace, because it's an opportunity to talk with each other and to meet a lot of stakeholders that are involved in several different things that are happening around the world. So it's the basis for everything that should result in a long-lasting peace around the world is to talk with each other. I have to say that although coming from Europe, I definitely agree with Mr. Foreign Minister regarding the need of the UN Council reform. I think it was Secretary General Guterres who said that the world is changing, but the UN is not. We are witnessing, by some statistics, 56 conflicts in the last year, armed conflicts that resulted in the casualties of civilians. This is the highest number in the last 100 years. So we are witnessing a shift of paradigm, not toward peace, but toward conflicts and toward wars. We definitely need to turn this around. And the reform of United Nations is one of the key pillars of this to happen. Of course, it's not the fault of international organizations or the United Nations, it's the fault of the member states at the end of the day. And how to convince member states to go into this exercise. The theory of games says that if you end up in the situation that is lose-lose for both sides, it started a so-called vicious cycle that will only go down. So we basically need to turn this paradigm and to turn it into a win-win situation for all the sides. How to do it? Exactly with what the Secretary General put on the table. The peace is not something we would discuss at the beauty contests, or it's a real work. You have to work for peace, and you have to work on the different elements of bringing the international community to a state, to a peaceful state. You also asked about the role of international law in this process, and here, working for some time with the courts in The Hague, I would like to, maybe ask you, or I'll ask you and then I'll answer by myself, how big is the budget of the International Criminal Court? So we have one international court that is global. Unfortunately, not all states around this globe are members of this court. But how big is the budget? It's 180 million euros per year. That's 1/3 of the budget of Slovenian Ministry of Agriculture, just to give you an example. So if we are meaning seriously with defending international law, with defending international criminal law, with defending international humanitarian law, we need to do something about it. And only saying we have the institutions is far from enough. we have the institutions, but they don't have means and resources to operate in a way that would protect international law. So I think it's very important not only to reform the system with changing the balance, to reflect the balance of the today's world into the international organizations, but also to invest into the system. I think this is very important, and we need to invest in both in multilateral organizations as such, but specifically in the organizations that are dealing with international law.
Madam Special Coordinator, Lebanon has seen some of the most creative diplomacy in the past 2 years. I know that you follow this very closely. Can you share with us the kinds of creative diplomacy we're seeing and what you expect in the future with more forms of creative diplomacy?
Thank you very much for the question, and I am very pleased to be among the distinguished panelists today. So every day I ask myself what is the added value of UN and concretely as UNSCO, United Nations Special Coordinator Office, to build trust in Lebanon. So allow me to start with my definition of trust. It's always useful, to prepare a small definition because this inspires us. So I think, this is my definition, that we can build trust even by the way we report the other side's concern. We show our objectivity and keen interest in going deeper into the root causes of the difficulties. So with this approach, I try, and my colleague, of course, and the whole international community in Lebanon, to help the country with the acceptance, of course, of Lebanese, to bring hope, first of all, to the people, but also to have concrete achievements. So allow me to share my two maybe examples. One is related to the institutional reforms. Concretely, it was about how the international community supported Lebanon during the parliamentary elections, how we work well together between the main donors. Of course, UNDP has an excellent expertise, but also European Union, US, and the Arab League. When we speak very much about the prevention, I hope I will have the chance to speak about it. It's very important to cooperate with regional organizations. So here I should mention this excellent experience. Why? Because all regional organizations decided to send monitoring delegations with concrete recommendations, and we consulted each other. So the product was good. The election happened, of course, and since 2 years now, Lebanon has a new parliament. It's not new, but the parliament is there. Another example, since Lebanon has a very geostrategical position in the Middle East, is an example how we deal with the situation in the south. You know that in Lebanon, UN is well represented. We have 26 agencies, including UNIFIL as peacekeeping operation, and of course, UNSCO as political mission. And our role is to do everything to monitor the implementation of the resolution 1701. This resolution created this political mission. One example of this creative approach in 22 was to try to build more stability between Lebanon and Israel. Here again, it was an example how good cooperation between member states, in this case US, and mediator or facilitator, Mr. Amos Hochstein, and UN with the expertise for many years on the ground can bring good results. But allow me to again come with a new definition. This agreement on maritime boundary, so de facto recognizing the maritime borders between two countries was possible thanks to the economic incentive. This was the magic formula where two countries accepted this incentives because it was a win-win situation, quite, I think, interesting for the countries. So I would like to say that yes, in diplomacy we need new ideas, and it was a very innovative approach. So maybe I will stop here and we'll have another chance. Thank you.
Dr. Floyd, one of the most striking parts of the Agenda for Peace is the statement that we are facing the possibility that in the very near future we could see a major confrontation between nuclear-armed major powers. And then the very first of the recommendations is to eliminate all nuclear weapons. You play a very distinctive role in achieving that possibility. Please comment.
Thank you, Lise, for the question. You may ask, why was the elimination of nuclear weapons the first item in that document? Let me tell you why. It was just another beautiful morning in southern Japan. On the 6th of August, a clear morning, and a US bomber was plying its way towards Japan. It released its payload, and this bomb descended towards the city of Hiroshima below. When it was still several hundred meters above the ground, it exploded. And from that one explosion, the first time that a nuclear weapon had been used in combat, by the end of the year, more than 80,000 people lost their lives. With the second bomb dropped a few days later, in 1945, on Nagasaki, the direct toll was nearly 200,000 people. If that's not reason enough as to why nuclear weapons and their elimination was to be justified as the first thing to be mentioned, let me tell you, those nuclear weapons dropped in Japan in 1945 were tiny. So small. They are measured in terms of how many tons of TNT equivalent the explosion was. And can you imagine that those tiny bombs, the one in Hiroshima, was 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent? That is a huge pile of chemical explosive, right? But since then, further development and testing of nuclear weapons has ended up in creating weapons that are equivalent to 50 million tons of TNT. So I told you 80,000 people died one morning in Hiroshima with a tiny bomb, only 16,000 kilotons, 16,000 tons. The potential 50 million tons. That is a very good reason why these kinds of weapons should be eliminated. And there is significant concern for as long as these weapons exist that they might be used. Although the rationale is deterrence, the nations of the world are more concerned today about potential use, due to various statements that have been made and in different conflict zones, are more concerned about potential use than in any other time in recent history. Lisa, I could tell you more about what we're doing about this, but that is why I think the Secretary General was absolutely right to start with that point. Thank you.
Dr. Floyd, thank you. And we're going to be coming back to the steps that can be taken to eliminate them. Jane, you and I have been in the UN for many, many years. We've seen a number of agendas for peace. What's new about this one? What are your expectations for its possible success?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for being here. It's late in the day. A very good afternoon to everyone. Many thanks also to Antalya Diplomacy Forum for giving us this opportunity to talk about the new agenda for development. As you have heard, I've been with the United Nations for more than 40 years. Let me tell you, I never felt more than I do now that we need a stronger United Nations. I think that is where we start from. That is where I'm coming from. The United Nations, as we have also heard throughout the last 2 days, was built on the ashes of World War II. We heard about the devastation in Hiroshima. So the establishment of the United Nations is based on peace. You know, how we actually maintain, create, and keep our peace. The raison d'etre, the purpose of United Nations is this. It is enshrined in the UN Charter. The UN Charter is designed to promote peace and stability, to promote human rights, to promote development, and to promote international solidarity and international cooperation. Indeed, in the past 7 decades, we are very much moving into the 8th decade that the United Nations has been established. We have registered many successes. Thanks to the Millennium Development Goals, more than 1 million people were lifted out of poverty. More than ever, girls were able to go to school. Many, many good measures were taken to fight against climate change. Maybe we were able to do all that because we were living, compared to now, in times of peace, relatively speaking, I should say. What we are observing today is, unfortunately, I wouldn't say a collapse of everything that we have built and we have worked for, but I'm afraid we are pretty close to it. I don't want to be a doomsday sayer, but this is, as many times Secretary General Mr. Guterres has said, a perfect storm. In the past decade, only 350 billion were spent on humanitarian efforts, on peacekeeping, on refugees. In 2020 only, so we are at the beginning of 2024, so let me say 3 years ago, military spending globally reached $2 trillion. Now these numbers are much, much higher. We are talking about, indeed, resources devoted to war rather than peace. The new agenda for development is one of the policy briefs that will be discussed in the Summit of the Future in September at the General Assembly. It aims at looking at security and peace frameworks with new eyes, with an intention to create systems, setups built on solidarity, trust, transparency, cooperation, to indeed give the people what they need for their future. One of my favorite quotes from the Secretary General most recently is what he said. He said that we are trying to solve the problems of today and create a future for our grandchildren built on the systems established by our grandfathers. So we are really, really way behind. And a new agenda for development is a way, in fact, to fill this gap. Why we call it new agenda for development? You may recall that there is an agenda for development that was created in 1992 at the time of Kofi Annan. There was an agenda for peace and an agenda for development. Agenda for peace 1992, we're talking about 32 years ago, was created when the Berlin Wall came down, when the Soviet Union imploded, when the Cold War ended. It was a time of peace, it was a time of reconciliation. So there was a lot of hope. Now it's a completely different world that we are facing. Wars are raging, poverty is on the rise, diplomacy is flailing. You know, we can enumerate, as we have been enumerating throughout this forum. At the end of the day, the new agenda for development, I would say, is still a document of hope. It still tells us actually it is in our hands. In a period of transition, we are seeing that everything is changing. But if we don't know where we are going, we don't know where we are going to, what we are going to end up with. So the new agenda development is a blueprint to give us a more peaceful world where we have partnerships, where we have more inclusivity, women, youth, local communities, where nations are at stake, at the center, and we have stronger cooperation with private sector, with civil society, indeed bring the best in all of us here. At the end of the day, this is not about the United Nations. It is about us as humanity, it's about our nations, it's about our collective future.
Jan, thank you. What we would like to do now is to take a first set of observations, comments, and questions to the panelists, and then we'll go through another round of directed questions to each of the panel members, and again open it up. May we invite questions from the floor? If there are no questions, then permit us a second round. Oh, yes, sir.
What is missing from the agenda?
What's missing from the agenda? Ali, is that you? This is Ali Verjee, who is a colleague of mine and works in London on a number of African issues. Colleagues, if we would invite you to introduce yourselves when you ask a question. Who would like to answer Ali's question? What is missing from this agenda? Madam Special Coordinator.
I think now Namibia and Germany are preparing a declaration for the summit for the future. So, you know, through the process of negotiations in New York, they will gather different ideas. So there is a chance maybe to complete the discussion with creative ideas. Concrete examples of how to deal with crisis maybe, but in a declaration like that, it's always difficult to put it. So being as concrete as possible. As I mentioned, I like definitions because we are going deeper and deeper into the root causes of the problems. I think defining the root causes, or maybe looking to the new interlocutors who can inspire us, maybe.
Mr. State Secretary.
Thank you. What I think is missing in the new agenda for peace is something that it's probably not even possible to put it inside. It's the willingness. It's the willingness of everybody that's involved in implementation of the new agenda for peace. And if you ask me how to connect willingness with the goal, I can't give you the answer, but I can give you, for example, I can give you the example that worked. Shortly after UN was created, European Union was created, and European Union was the idea was the same. It was the peace process. It was the reconciliation process, the peace process after the end of the Second World War. But how it was created, it was in different way, because it was economic cooperation first, and then upgraded with the political cooperation. And because it was in the economic interest of everybody involved, then the political cooperation could work. So we have it's 72 years after the creation of the coal and steel community. That was the first form of the European Union that we know today. And in those 72 years, there was zero armed conflict between any member state. Zero. Imagine that before this, every 20 years, we witnessed a major, 30 years, we witnessed a major war in Europe. So it's difficult to speak how to make this document better, but I guess we should speak how to persuade everybody, how to make the willingness bigger of everybody that's involved.
Thank you very much. What is missing in this agenda? In our attempt to change the thinking about finding peace, from the Secretary General's letter, which identified the paradigm shift, he did attempt to indicate which are those areas of conflict. It is important, just to add to what my colleague has said, that the willingness must be based on an attempt to understand what are the drivers to conflict. And once we have identified those drivers, to what extent are we willing to work together to eliminate those drivers in order to arrive at a peaceful world? I'll just give you a simple example. What drives terrorism? What drives the divergence within states and between states? What drives climate change? Do we all agree that those drivers are acceptable to all of us? Are we all willing to work together in order to correct and to attempt to resolve what we identify as drivers to conflict?
Yeah, I think I will actually very much echo what the State Secretary has said. We need, first and foremost, goodwill, willingness among nations, not maybe immediately to solve all the problems, but to have the willingness to sit down, to talk, to be able to solve them. We are living, unfortunately, in a period of impunity, and I am afraid lack of trust among the nations is at the highest level. So how do we build this trust? How do we prevent, this idea of compromise from being considered like a dirty word? We have to be able to create the conditions for the nations to be able to sit down and discuss and put things on the table and talk like civilized people. I was saying that the first agenda for development for peace and the agenda for development were two sides of the coin. We still have those two sides of the coin. We have the new agenda for peace and we have the sustainable development goals. And that is maybe what we should be focusing on, to eradicate, in fact, poverty, to ensure women's and youth's rights are protected. We have taken care of our environmental concerns. Unfortunately, SDGs are not doing very well either. Of the 17 goals, only 12% are on track. 30% are in fact at risk of being reversed or lagging. Half of them are either weak or insufficient in implementation. It is good news. Recently at the SDG summit, the nations approved a package, a stimulus package. So I think there is also more effort needed indeed to look at this peace and development as a package. Unless we have that, to be able to raise equality among nations in all senses, it will be very, very difficult to work towards peace. One thing I like indeed about the new agenda for peace is also the fact that it's quite holistic. It tries to look at it, in fact, from all these different perspectives. I think it's a comprehensive document. I think it is also a result of, in fact, really extensive discussions among the member states, consultations with civil society. But to implement it, we do, at the end of the day, need goodwill, and we also need other things to prop it up, to make it much more viable, attractive, sustainable, implementable.
Your question is a nasty question about what is missing. I think it is holistic, and it is broad-ranging. But it's more to me about what the document couldn't do, but we need to do. And that is to convert so many of those principles and aspirations into action. That is the critical issue. That is where the states of the world need to come together and to agree, on the actions that would follow. And as wonderful as the document is, it in itself doesn't build trust. But these are the things that need to follow, and they need to follow in the individual situations that different conflicts that have been alluded to already. I'm very keen to see what flows on. And with the Summit of the Future coming up, there's also this document, this Pact for the Future, which is, in diplomatic speak, action-oriented commitments. Well, let's keep that aspiration high, that they will be action-oriented commitments, but that's what I would love to see more of. But I didn't have that expectation to be in that document.
Ali, a reflection from many of us who have been involved in discussions on the document. Note that it's a terrific act of imagination. So you have a UN that is paralyzed in dealing with the great crises of the day, whether it's Ukraine, most importantly in Gaza right now. You have a UN that in many cases is marginalized, is struggling to deal effectively with climate change, with irregular migration, has been unable to make any serious progress on accountability for human rights violations and so forth. And then this document comes out and says, but the UN is going to be the site for a whole new idea about how nation states are going to get along with each other. And it's going to be the place where there are new regulatory frameworks for new weapon systems. It's going to be the regulatory place where relations in space and other new terrains are managed. It's going to be the site of a new deterrence framework. I mean, wow. If you look at its previous track record, there's something to hope for. But if you look at what it's doing right now and the difference between that and what is imagined in this document, I think there's reason that many people are skeptical. We're going to have another round of discussion here, and then we'll open up for more questions. Dr. Floyd, we're going to ask you to talk about because you were very positive in saying, and there are things we're doing to get to that no nuclear war. If you can share that with us.
Thank you. The treaty that the organization I lead, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, the treaty we're responsible for is about banning nuclear weapon tests anywhere and for all time. The amazing success of this treaty, Lise, is that it was open for signature in September of 1996. If we look back before that date, there were over 2,000 nuclear tests that were conducted across the face of our planet. And then if we look from that date in September 1996 through to today, less than 12 tests have taken place. That is success. Now, why has it been that successful? Some of you might know the treaty has not entered into force. How can it be successful if it's not legally binding? Let me tell you. Part of our responsibility is to set up a monitoring system of 337 stations, facilities across the world that would pick up the telltale signs of a nuclear explosion anywhere, anytime. More than 90% of that is in place. And we are confident that we could detect a nuclear explosion of half a kiloton. Remember, Hiroshima was 16. You're going to have all these numbers worked out, right? Half a kiloton or more could be detected anywhere on the face of this planet. Now, what that does is empowers states. The states that possess nuclear weapons have committed to moratoria, all bar one, committed to a moratoria on nuclear testing. A political commitment to not test. And the reason that's so powerful is that our verification system would mean that if they did test, all the nations of the world would know. There is no place to hide. And so we are all the beneficiaries of states choosing not to test, to not develop further their nuclear weapons. So I would love to see the treaty enter into force. Do not get me wrong. I would love to see it to be legally binding. But there is trust which is built through verification such that those political commitments to not test are holding amazingly well. This century, only one state has tested a nuclear weapon. There is reason for optimism, but we will never give up.
Thank you, Dr. Floyd. Mr. State Secretary, your country is on the Security Council. There's a war of aggression in Ukraine. There's the absolute tragedy in Gaza. Why isn't the Security Council doing a better job? What's the main obstacle? What's happening there? Why is it letting the world down?
I would wish I would know this, but well, we definitely have the crisis of multilateralism, and we definitely have the crisis of UN and the Security Council. And it's very frustrating as a small country being a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, how the work is tried to be done, but then at the end you fail. What we are witnessing now in Ukraine, what we are witnessing now in Gaza, is something that it's simply, I would say before, unimaginable for a civilized world not to be able to act, though we are not acting. Slovenia is trying to be loud wherever we can. We are trying to be loud at the European Union level in Brussels. We are trying to be loud in New York. We are speaking with more or less everybody around the world, but still the things are not moving. So I'm just pleading, we are pleading to everybody that are members of UN Security Council, but also other international organizations, to realize that if, when, then now it's the time to act and to do something about it. So it's very, I know it sounds very frustrating to listen to this, but that's how it is, and we can try to speak with each other. We can try to organize conferences. We can try to call for for peace talks, but the things are not moving anywhere. I would say that the major problem is because we didn't manage to reform the UN system in the past. So it's a system that was made more than 70 years ago for the situation that was back then. But now we just are dealing with different situation with the old system. But let me also try to say something on a positive note, because I wouldn't like you to think that the multilateralism is dead. It's not. And what, for example, CTBTO is doing and what other organizations are doing, it's not something that you know, we shouldn't take into account. You mentioned I was in The Hague for 7 years and also working a lot with OPCW. It's the Organization for Prevention of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. This organization got a Nobel Peace Prize because it managed to destroy all declared stockpiles of chemical weapons around the globe. So what international organizations are doing, it's something really, really big, but we should be able to do more, and we should be able to do more, especially in UN Security Council. We are going to keep trying, but it's not only us, it's also a couple of others that should.
You know, for 25 years, there's been an unprecedented period of global cooperation that was ushered in by the end of the Cold War. And what we're seeing now is, of course, in many ways, the denouement, almost the end of that extraordinary period of global cooperation. And the implications for how we interact with each other as countries, as member states of the United Nations, is very profound, and it remains unanswered. May we invite questions and observations from the floor again? Sir. We'll take 3 questions and then responses.
Yasin Yaylagül from Kapadokya University. I'm an MA student. When we think of humanity's history, it's full of with wars, genocides, and ongoing war, and etc. And I'm asking that, do you think that a global peace is possible?
May we take the second question? We're going to answer them together. The second question, sir?
Thank you. My name is Umberto Del Panta. I work for the European Investment Bank, the Bank of the European Union. And I like very much when Marko Stučić mentioned the European Union as a mechanism to prevent wars, which were recurring every generation. The EU even was awarded with a Nobel for Peace. So it has proven to be an effective mechanism, starting from the economy. And in this context, I have to say, I'm a lucky guy because both my grandfather and my father for a few months were involved in major wars. I was a lucky guy because I never seen something like that. But a few weeks ago, we heard frightening things. Germany's chancellor saying we should start thinking about a possible war in a few years against Russia. The same from other politicians. President Macron saying maybe we have to deploy troops in Ukraine at a certain point. What's going on? I'm asking myself. I was lucky up to now. And then from the other side, I mean, I was lucky because I work for the EIB and they seconded me to the Black Sea Trade and Development Bank. I work in Russia, in Ukraine, a very good friend in Ukraine, in Russia, even in Donbass. And all this seems to me a nonsense. And somebody's telling me, well, Russia tried to join NATO several times. Since 1954 with Molotov, with Gorbachev, with Yeltsin, with Putin. We never found a way. And now, where are the biggest mass destruction weapons? In Russia and in NATO, if you want. I mean, I don't understand what's going on. If someone can comment on that, wasn't it a mistake not to find a good compromise, like we've done with Italy and Germany were the bad guys because they provoked the Second World War. no, the bad guy are the Russians, but at the end of the day, if we want peace, we have to make peace with the enemy. It's not high time to think about that? That's all. Thank you.
I would like to thank you for joining this forum and sharing your valuable ideas with us. And as Ms. Joanna Wroneka started her statement like saying, mentioning and highlighting trust issues, and how can we manage this trust of environment, such a world that's increasing arm race, and also you also mentioned about the past years, previous years was increasing also conflicts around the world. Thank you.
We're nearing the end of our sessions. We'll take a final round of observations. We'll start with you, Mr. State Secretary.
I'll try to briefly answer to all these three questions that would probably need at least a couple of hours to talk about. Is global peace possible? If we won't think it is, we would go home now and do something else. It should be possible. We are living in, I would put it like this: we managed a so big development when it comes to technology as the society, but if we are looking into development that was made when it comes to the relations between countries, we could argue that we are still far behind what we could achieve. So I would wish we would also catch up in this field with our technology development, so that we could bring our society to a peaceful state that would last. Was it a mistake not to, if I understand you correctly, not to find a way in engaging with Russian Federation in the past? I think it's a mistake not to find way to engage with anybody. The rule of the game should be engagement. So if we are distancing from somebody, if we are pushing away somebody, we are creating the grounds for conflict. If we are trying to engage with somebody, then we, at least I think so, we eliminate or we lower the chances of conflict. So as a general principle, I would say finding a way to engaging with somebody, it should be the name of the game. How to step back and turn around the arm race that we are witnessing, and that also influence, of course, in the number of conflicts around the world. Again, cooperation, and I would again use the example of European Union cooperation that is built on the trade and upgraded with political cooperation. I think this proved to be working at least in Europe, but also in other regions we have good examples. So I think this should be the basis also globally. Thank you.
General.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you very much for those wonderful questions. Is global peace possible? Where we are seated right now, that is utopia, but it is possible. Why? The challenge that we are faced with in the current society that we live in is the question of our mindset. Many of us do not look at humankind in terms of interests. As a result, we withdraw to our segments and behave as if the rest do not exist. It is important that we recognize that our Creator brought us on this planet for a purpose. And that purpose must be addressed by all of us as one. And that's why I agree with my colleague that in order for us to be able to do that, we should recognize that linkages should be established, interests, we must attempt to converge them so that together we can be able to work to achieve eventually what I began by calling utopia, that it is possible if we work together, if our interests converge, we can be able to achieve global peace.
May we invite Special Coordinator?
Thank you very much, and thank you for this question. Allow me to start with an observation from the ground. It's always useful to have concrete examples. I adore to meet young people, and once in a university in Lebanon, a very young girl asked me, in diplomacy, what is important, how to be a successful diplomat. So my answer was quite philosophical. I said, you should read poetry, because it's about imagination and inspiration. So you ask about the trust. The definition I presented allows me to listen to the people and to be inspired by the people. If you have this capacity of absorb listening, you can come with creative ideas. Another practical reflection about the peace. When we listen, we educate ourselves. Through education, we can, I think, achieve peace. But again, it's about the perception, how I perceive you. If I am positive and you perceive me also positively, there is a bridge. So what the Secretary General is emphasizing is in his agenda for peace, it's very much about prevention. So how to prevent, and by building trust, it's about bridging between different people, the culture of peaceful coexistence. The country I am in, it's a beautiful example of the coexistence between different religious groups, cultures, but we are not talking enough about involving or investing in young people. I think young people can come with good ideas. I should also mention the role of women in politics. And finally, complementarity, because UN can offer an experience, but regional organizations, as I mentioned, can offer complementary advantages. So a lot of maybe philosophical thoughts, but we should be positive. Thank you.
Jehan.
Well, excellent question to start with. I will answer your question with another question. What's the alternative? I don't think we have any alternative but to work for global peace. What is startling to me is that we seem to be planning even more wars as we look towards the future, rather than trying to stop wars and work towards peace. It is staggering to hear that almost a quarter of the world's population live in conflict-affected areas, or they are directly affected by conflict. This is just amazing. I mean, at this day and age, we are living in the 21st century. We have made such huge achievements. How do we somehow, what we learned, how do we make sure what we learned, what we accumulated as humanity is used for better purposes? As Robert said, we need more mechanisms for building trust. The example you gave is excellent. I think we should be looking at how we, let's say, implement the good ideas that are expressed in big words in documents like the new Agenda for Peace. How do we look at good examples and multiply them? reform of, it's not only about the United Nations, as I said, it's also about the reform of the whole international system, the global governance structures. It's not just about the UN. Maybe UN is the biggest, the most prominent, the most visible. And it is indeed the biggest international forum that we have, where everybody has equal voice. This is an amazing power that we have at the United Nations that we are not, in a way, using to the best of our capacities. The Security Council has issues, but there are many instruments within the UN that the member states can call upon. And there are things that are also in the new agenda for peace that are mentioned to reform in some ways, to the extent possible, the the Security Council. The list of which is asking for more accountability of the members of the Security Council when they use their veto power. So there are many, many things that can be done. But there is also need for more financing for prevention. Only 20% of ODA went to peacekeeping in the past years. This is a very tiny amount. We should be having more resources devoted to peacekeeping, peace enforcing, as Liz said. We need more financing for prevention. And for me, prevention is, I think Joanna said, it is also about root causes. It again comes back to this holistic approach. I will actually just quote something from one of my most favorite Secretaries General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld. He was the second Secretary General, and believe it or not, he is still the youngest ever appointed. He was only 47 years old when he was appointed. You know, I think we should do better on that front too, not only women, but youth also. So that's another story, I think, for another panel, so I'll leave it at that. But what Dag Hammarskjöld said was, he said something, it's not an exact quote, but he said something like the United Nations was not created to lift humanity to heavens, but it was created to prevent humanity from descending into hell. I think that is what we should keep in mind.
Robert.
There is often a lot of skepticism about the value of the legal architecture that is there to facilitate peace. But let me just tell you in closing that for me, it's really important that we listen to people from other parts of the world and with different perspectives. In the last 2 years, there are two conversations that I can never get out of my head. One with the president of a small island nation, the other with a prime minister of a different island nation. I discussed with them about the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and they said, we're ratifying this thing. But in both cases, what happened next has never left me. They sat back in their chairs and they both pondered, and they said something like this, that, you know, if a country chose to invade us, there is nothing we could do to stop them. But went on to say there is only one thing that can protect us. And I said to both of those leaders, different parts of the world, what is it? What is the one thing that can protect you? And you know what they said? They said the international rules-based order is the one thing that can protect them. And I was challenged deeply. Because for some nations, we spend our time debating as to whether this is even a thing. And yet for other nations, it is a fundamental part of their national security strategy. We need to hear those perspectives. and redouble our efforts to strengthen whatever you want to call it, but the architecture which is there to facilitate peace for all nations and for the least of these. Thank you.
We would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope all of you join me in thanking Foreign Minister Jeje, State Secretary Marco, Special Coordinator Yorana, Executive Director Dr. Floyd, my good friend Jae Hong. Thank you.